The lawless streets of Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, witnessed countless acts of brutality in 1879, but what rancher Tom McKenna encountered that scorching August afternoon would test every principle the frontier had hammered into his soul. Three notorious outlaws, the Garrison brothers, had cornered an elderly Apache medicine man behind the saloon, beating him for the crime of walking through their town. Tom's decision to draw his Winchester against three killers to defend this stranger would seem like suicide to most men. But by sunrise, 100 Apache warriors would surround his ranch in a display of protection that transformed the Arizona frontier forever, proving that a single act of courage could forge alliances that years of treaties had failed to create. Chapter 1. Violence at Sunset. The dusty streets of Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, baked under the August sun as Tom McKenna guided his wagon toward Henderson's General Store, the monthly supply run that connected his isolated ranch to what passed for civilization in 1879. At 38, Tom had spent 12 years carving out a modest cattle operation from the unforgiving desert, learning that survival required equal measures of toughness and knowing when to mind your own business. The town ahead represented everything unstable about the frontier. Saloons outnumbered churches 4-1, while the sheriff's office stood perpetually empty since the last lawman had fled after receiving his third death threat. Tom was loading flour sacks into his wagon when commotion erupted behind the Broken Wheel Saloon, angry voices carrying over the usual afternoon noise of drunk cowboys and territorial arguments. His first instinct was to ignore it. Willow Creek's daily violence wasn't his concern, but something in the cruel laughter that followed made him pause. Peering around the building's corner, he witnessed a scene that challenged every survival instinct the frontier had beaten into him. The Garrison brothers, Jake, Will, and Boyd, had surrounded an elderly Apache man whose dignified bearing couldn't hide his advanced age or current vulnerability. The old man's traditional dress marked him as someone of importance within tribal structure, though his weathered hands remained empty of weapons as the outlaws circled like wolves around wounded prey. Jake Garrison's boot connected with the elder's ribs, sending him sprawling into the dust while his brothers laughed at the savage who dared walk through their town without permission. Tom recognized the Garrisons as the worst kind of frontier trash, men who discovered that violence and intimidation paid better than honest work, especially when directed at those the law wouldn't protect. They'd been suspected in multiple murders and robberies throughout the territory. The witnesses had a peculiar habit of forgetting what they'd seen when questioned by authorities. The elderly Apache represented an easy target for their cruelty, someone whose death would barely merit mention in territorial records. The moral calculation took less than a heartbeat. Tom's Winchester rifle came up smooth and natural, his voice cutting through the afternoon heat with authority that surprised even himself. The Garrison brothers froze at the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked, their expressions shifting from amusement to murderous rage as they recognized the rancher who just signed his own death warrant by interfering in their entertainment. Chapter 2. The Elder's Identity. The tension shattered when Jake Garrison reached for his sidearm, forcing Tom to shift his rifle toward the most immediate threat, while keeping peripheral awareness of the other brothers. His intervention had created a momentary standoff that wouldn't last long in Willow Creek's lawless atmosphere, where witnesses had learned that survival meant selective blindness. Tom backed toward his wagon while keeping the Winchester trained on the outlaws, gesturing for the elderly Apache to follow despite knowing this rescue would paint a target on his own back that might never fade. The ride back to Tom's ranch stretched across 15 miles of desert silence, broken only by the injured elder's labored breathing and the creak of wagon wheels over rocky terrain. Tom kept checking the horizon for dust clouds that would signal pursuit, though he suspected the Garrisons would take time planning their revenge rather than risking open confrontation while he held tactical advantage. The Apache elder sat with remarkable dignity despite obvious pain from a beating, his dark eyes studying Tom with an intensity that suggested he was evaluating far more than just his rescuer's immediate intentions. Once safely at his ranch, Tom discovered the full extent of the old man's injuries: cracked ribs, deep bruises across his torso, and a gash above his left eye that would need careful cleaning to prevent infection. As he worked with gentle efficiency, learned from years of tending injured cattle and horses, the elder finally spoke in accented but clear English that revealed education beyond what most territorial residents possessed. His name was White Hawk, and his position within the Chiricahua Apache Nation carried weight that Tom only began to comprehend as the medicine man explained his presence in Willow Creek. White Hawk had been gathering sacred herbs that grew only in specific locations their tribe had used for generations, places now claimed by settlers who neither understood nor cared about their spiritual significance. This particular mission held crucial importance. The herbs were needed for a ceremony to heal the chief's gravely ill grandson, and White Hawk had risked entering hostile territory because his duty as medicine man superseded personal safety. The Garrison brothers had caught him returning from the sacred grounds, deciding that an elderly native alone made perfect entertainment for their afternoon of drinking. Tom offered extended shelter while White Hawk recovered, but the medicine man declined with quiet certainty that suggested knowledge beyond present circumstances. Before departing at dusk, White Hawk placed his weathered hand on Tom's shoulder and spoke words that would prove prophetic within hours. You have chosen to stand between evil and innocence, placing your life as a shield for one your people call an enemy. This courage creates debts that my people honor above all treaties written by distant governments. Before the sun rises again, you will understand that no good deed stands alone in the great web of existence. Chapter 3. Dawn's Revelation. Tom McKenna awakened before dawn to an eerie silence that immediately triggered his frontier instincts. The complete absence of normal ranch sounds suggesting something had fundamentally altered his isolated world overnight. His cattle should have been stirring with approaching daylight, while the desert birds that nested in his cottonwood trees typically began their morning chorus well before sunrise. Instead, an almost supernatural quiet had settled over his property, the kind of stillness that usually preceded either violence or profound change in the territorial wilderness. Peering through his cabin window into the pre-dawn dimness, Tom's breath caught at the sight that materialized as his eyes adjusted to the minimal light. Silhouettes of mounted warriors lined every ridge surrounding his ranch, their forms so perfectly still they might have been carved from the very rocks they stood upon. As the eastern sky began its gradual transformation from black to deep purple, the full magnitude of what had occurred during the night became devastatingly clear. Apache warriors, at least 100 strong, had positioned themselves in strategic defensive positions around his entire property. The sunrise revealed details that transformed Tom's initial alarm into stunned amazement at the tactical precision displayed before him. Warriors occupied every elevated position that commanded clear fields of fire toward the approach routes to his ranch, their placement demonstrating military expertise that would have impressed any cavalry officer. Their weapons remained secured in non-threatening positions, but their very presence created an impenetrable defensive perimeter that no force in the territory could breach without devastating casualties. A small party separated from the main force and approached his cabin with ceremonial dignity, led by a figure whose bearing commanded immediate recognition as someone holding tremendous authority. Chief Stone Bear of the Chiricahua Apache rode a magnificent black stallion, his war bonnet catching the morning light, while ceremonial paint marked his weathered features. Behind him rode 5 senior warriors and White Hawk himself, the medicine man showing no signs of yesterday's injuries as he sat straight-backed on a painted pony. Stone Bear dismounted with fluid grace that belied his 60 years, approaching Tom's porch with the measured steps of someone conducting diplomatic business of the highest importance. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had led his people through decades of conflict and survival, each word carefully chosen in the English he had learned through necessity rather than choice. His message was simple yet profound. Tom McKenna had defended the tribe's most sacred person, their medicine man and spiritual guide, from certain death at the hands of enemies. This action had created a life debt that Apache law demanded be acknowledged through protection that would last as long as Tom drew breath, witnessed by every warrior present who would carry word throughout Apache territory that this white rancher stood under their permanent guardianship. Chapter 4. The Garrison Reckoning. The dust cloud approaching from the direction of Willow Creek announced the Garrison brothers' arrival long before their forms became visible in the morning heat shimmer, giving Tom precious minutes to comprehend how thoroughly the tactical situation had shifted in his favor. Jake Garrison led 15 hired guns toward what he expected to be an easy massacre of one isolated rancher, their confidence evident in their loose formation and casual approach that suggested they anticipated no meaningful resistance. The Outlaws' laughter and shouted threats carried across the desert air, dying abruptly as they crested the final ridge and discovered the true nature of what awaited them. The sight of 100 Apache warriors positioned across every strategic point surrounding Tom's ranch stopped the Garrison gang as effectively as if they'd ridden into a stone wall. Rifles and traditional weapons caught the morning sun from elevated positions that turned the approaching trail into a perfect killing field, while mounted warriors blocked every possible escape route with disciplined precision. Jake Garrison's face transformed from arrogant confidence to barely controlled panic as his brain processed the impossible reality that the rancher he'd come to murder now stood under the protection of enough Apache firepower to annihilate his entire gang within seconds. Chief Stone Bear urged his horse forward with deliberate slowness, positioning himself between the Outlaws and Tom's cabin while his warriors maintained their deadly stillness. His voice carried across the morning air with authority that predated any territorial law, speaking in English specifically so the Garrison brothers would understand every word of their situation. Tom McKenna had earned the eternal gratitude of the Chiricahua Apache by defending their medicine man from cowardly assault, creating bonds that made him brother to every warrior present. Any harm directed toward this ranch would be considered an act of war against the entire Apache nation, bringing consequences that would pursue the perpetrators beyond territorial boundaries into whatever hell they try to hide. The mathematics of survival required no complex calculation. 15 gunmen against 100 position warriors represented suicide rather than revenge. Jake Garrison's hand trembled near his holster as he weighed options that all led to the same conclusion, his brothers' faces showing they'd reached an identical understanding. The Apache protection surrounding Tom McKenna wasn't temporary theater, but a permanent reality that would follow him for life, making any future attempt at retaliation equally futile. Without speaking a word, the Garrison gang wheeled their horses and retreated toward Willow Creek, their departure watched by Apache scouts who ensured they kept riding until well beyond territorial boundaries. Chapter 5. Sacred Brotherhood. The formal adoption ceremony began as the sun reached its zenith, transforming Tom McKenna's modest ranch into sacred ground where Apache tradition would create bonds that transcended blood relation or territorial law. White Hawk led the rituals with recovered strength that seemed to flow from spiritual sources rather than physical healing, his movements precise and deliberate as he prepared ceremonial items that hadn't been used for adopting an outsider in living memory. The 100 warriors formed a great circle around the proceedings, their presence serving as witnesses to an event that would be recounted around Apache fires for generations. Chief Stone Bear's voice carried across the assembled gathering as he explained the profound significance of what Tom's actions represented to the Apache understanding of honor and courage. Defending an elder, particularly a medicine man, from younger and stronger enemies demonstrated the highest form of warrior spirit, protecting those who could not protect themselves, regardless of personal cost. Such actions created spiritual debts that Apache law recognized as more binding than any treaty negotiated by distant governments, obligations that extended beyond individual gratitude to encompass entire bloodlines and future generations. The ceremonial paint White Hawk applied to Tom's face told stories in symbolic language that predated written history, each design representing different aspects of the courage shown behind the Broken Wheel Saloon. Red ochre marked him as a warrior who had shed blood in defense of justice, while white clay identified him as someone who stood between darkness and light, evil and innocence. The black charcoal across his forehead proclaimed his new status as protector, someone the Apache Nation would defend as fiercely as he had defended their elder. When Chief Stone Bear spoke Tom's Apache name for the first time, Shield Bearer, the assembled warriors repeated it in unison, their voices creating thunder that rolled across the desert landscape. The name carried multiple meanings within Apache culture, recognizing both his physical act of shielding White Hawk from violence and his spiritual role as someone who would stand between two worlds, protecting understanding from the ignorance that bred hatred. This wasn't merely an honorary title, but a functioning position within tribal structure that carried real authority and responsibilities. The practical implications of Tom's adoption extended far beyond symbolic recognition to reshape the economic and social landscape of the entire region. His ranch immediately became recognized neutral territory, where Apache bands could trade freely with white merchants without fear of ambush or betrayal, while settlers could purchase Apache goods, especially their renowned horsemanship and leatherwork, without venturing into tribal lands. Tom's unique position as someone trusted by both cultures made him invaluable for mediating disputes that would otherwise escalate into bloodshed, his word carrying weight that no government official or military officer could match in negotiations between people who had learned to distrust official authority. Chapter 6: Legacy of Honor. The transformation of Tom McKenna from isolated rancher to bridge between civilizations reshaped the Arizona Territory in ways that no military campaign or government treaty had achieved throughout decades of conflict. Within 6 months, the Garrison brothers met their overdue justice when they attempted to rob a Wells Fargo shipment, discovering too late that Apache scouts had been tracking their movements since the confrontation at Tom's ranch. The information provided to federal marshals led to their capture and eventual hanging, ending a reign of terror that had plagued the territory for years. Tom's ranch evolved into something unprecedented on the frontier, a trading post where Apache crafts commanded fair prices from white merchants who previously would have shot any native approaching their stores. The economic benefits flowed in both directions as Apache bands gained access to ammunition, tools, and supplies without risking hostile encounters in settler towns. Chief Stone Bear's warriors provided security that made Tom's ranch the safest trading location in the territory, attracting business from hundreds of miles away. Federal authorities initially viewed the arrangement with suspicion, but Colonel Harrison at Fort Buchanan recognized the strategic value of having someone who could communicate effectively with both cultures. Tom's ability to prevent conflicts through mediation saved countless lives and military resources that would have been wasted on punitive campaigns. His reports on Apache movements came with context that helped distinguish between hostile raids and peaceful travel, preventing the tragic misunderstandings that had sparked unnecessary battles throughout the Western territories. The annual gathering that commemorated Tom's adoption ceremony became a cornerstone event that drew participants from both cultures, creating personal relationships that transcended the prejudices poisoning the broader territorial atmosphere. Young Apache warriors and settler children grew up knowing each other as individuals rather than enemies, their interactions at Tom's ranch planting seeds of understanding that would bloom in future generations. White Hawk's grandson, whose illness had brought the medicine man to Willow Creek that fateful day, recovered fully and later became a prominent advocate for peaceful coexistence, often citing Tom's courage as proof that character transcended race. When Tom McKenna died peacefully in 1901, his funeral drew the largest gathering of Apache and white mourners ever assembled in Arizona Territory. Chief Stone Bear himself, though aged and frail, insisted on speaking at the service, declaring that Shield Bear's legacy would outlive the mountains themselves. The ranch remained neutral ground for another generation, eventually becoming the site of a school where Apache and settler children learned together, fulfilling Tom's belief that understanding between peoples began with recognizing their shared humanity. Tom's incredible story proves that standing up for what's right, even against impossible odds, creates ripples that change history forever. If this tale of courage and honor inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more legendary frontier stories where one person's bravery transforms entire civilizations. Comment below. Would you have risked everything to defend stranger? Remember, true strength isn't about the fights you win, but the innocent you protect. Subscribe now and join our community of Wild West lovers.